My name is Anju Korean. I am one of the two co-founders of Vermilion Talent. My background is in management consulting. I took time off from my career to stay home with my sons. And when they were a bit older, I was ready to go back. And so I actually went back to consulting. And when I did is when I realized that there was a gap, is that there were many professionals out there that really wanted to get back in and didn't know how. And this is what led me to co-found Vermilion along with my business partner, Ann Barbara Lemon. So Ann Barbara is on the line. She's actually managing all of our slides and the Q&A and the chat behind the scenes. But I just wanted to do a brief introduction of her and her background. So her story is a little different than mine. She had a re-entry experience. So Ann Barbara is from the Netherlands. She's an expat from the Netherlands, came to the US. Her background in the Netherlands is in management consulting as well. She's also a tax attorney. So she came to the States and was looking at trying to figure out how to navigate the US market and how to re-enter the market here. So that was her experience. So we took our combined stories and pain points, and we have built a company that hopefully will make the process a lot easier for you than it was for the both of us. Which brings me to our topic at hand today. And I've kept Jaime and Diane waiting for a few moments, but our topic today is all about interviewing. And we're so excited to have Jaime Morris and Diane Spizzirro. So I want to give a little bit of background about Diane and Jaime before we get started. So Diane and Jaime are both career coaches with Success Image Careers, and each of them have a unique background as well. I wanted to share that with you again for context. So Jaime and I met as management consultants. We worked at PwC and IBM together, and that's how we first got to know each other. Jaime actually left consulting and moved into talent acquisition and recruiting within IBM. So she brings a really interesting and unique perspective that we're all going to benefit from today. So welcome, Jaime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Diane, so Diane also has made a bit of a career transition in her career. Her background is in insurance and risk management, but she made a transition to career counseling. When was that, Diane? When did you do that? About?
It was actually 19 years ago now.
19 years. Okay. So she started up a new career, made a career change in career development. And she is also currently the director of career management at Columbia University. Again, so excited to have both of you here and have this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let's get started. We'll start with a poll because we always want to see who's out there, who you're representing, and this will allow us a chance to get to know who you are and answer questions accordingly. So what best describes you? Have you been out of the paid workforce and are exploring coming back? Have you been out of the paid workforce and are actively seeking employment? Or are you currently working but looking for a change? This would be fantastic, again, just so we know who's out there. We always get a mix of people. So we'll just give a couple of seconds here and we'll wait for the answers to come in. And I think we should be able to display the results in just a second. Oh, here we go. So it looks like 67%. So the majority of the people here have been out of the paid workforce and are actively seeking employment right now. Which is great because you're in the right place. We're talking all about job search, interviews, so perfect. I think we're going to close this up and have one more quick question for you before we get started, and which is about when was your last interview? Again, this will help us understand and perhaps even just a question that you haven't asked yourself, when was the last time that you interviewed? Was it less than 3 months ago, within the last year, over a year ago, or over 5 years ago? So we'll give you just a couple of seconds to fill this out. And I just wanted to share that I recently I wrote a blog about interviewing, and And when I had my first interview after making the decision to go back, I did the numbers very quickly and realized it had been 10 years since my last interview. So it was not only during my break, but even prior to that, my promotions had happened while I was working. So I really hadn't had a formal interview in 10 years. So I'm curious to see what our audience is saying. Okay, excellent. Okay, so less than 3 months ago. This is fantastic. So 63% of you have had an interview in the past 3 months. So that's fantastic. So wonderful. So let's keep going, and let's talk a little bit about how to get started. So many people haven't interviewed in a long time. I think our audience is a bit different from that, but what we hear is that people haven't interviewed in a long time. So how has interviewing changed? Diane, Jaime, how has interviewing changed in the past few years? So what should people be aware of? Diane?
So I think that as far as interviewing, I've seen quite a bit of, you've got phone screen, or you even get, and we'll talk about virtual avatar as kind of the first screen of an interview. So you're not really getting face-to-face until you've passed that first hurdle. And so I think preparing for and Skype interviewing or Zoom interviewing, or really being prepared to be able to do that kind of interview is going to be very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. And Jaime, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because a lot of us have, it's always nerve-wracking to go on an interview.
Mm-hmm.
So just to sort of know that there's no such thing as the perfect candidate. No candidate is going to have 100% of what an employer needs and wants. So I would say that most viable candidates have about 80% of what an employer wants, but it's that other 20% that really makes you unique, and that's where you need to shine. So I think going in there, just understanding that there's no such thing as perfect is just helpful in just taking the edge off, really.
Okay. Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. So we're making this super interactive. We're going to do another poll because, again, Diane mentioned a few different types of interviewing. She mentioned virtual avatar, phone interviews, etc. How have you done, I think most of you mentioned that you've done interviews in the past 3 months. Was it via virtual avatar, phone, face-to-face, a video interview? All of these mediums can be a bit different and unique. We just wanted to get a sense of what you've experienced to date.
Yeah, and I think the virtual avatar is a really interesting one because you're videoing yourself, and you only have a certain amount of time to actually answer the question. So I think that's a real interesting concept.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely something new that I certainly hadn't heard of that when I did my interview after my career break. So let's see what our poll results are saying. So 45% have been via phone, 36% face-to-face, and 18% via video interview. And surprisingly, nobody via virtual avatar. So, but Diane, you shared a little bit about, we have a great question coming in from Natalie about just defining what that is. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so rather than an actual individual, a real person being on the other side of the Zoom or Skype, it would be a robot, or an avatar that throws out a question, and you videotape your answer and submit it to the avatar. I think you get maybe 1 or 2 chances, and then you have to submit. But they also do it on time frame too. So they'll give you 45 seconds or a minute to answer the question. So you have to be really crisp and know how to answer that. And we're seeing that more and more with the larger, like Fortune 500s, to streamline the screen interview process.
Okay, fantastic. And Diane, I think when we spoke earlier, you had mentioned that there was a great resource available if you wanted to practice interviewing with an avatar. Could you just mention that, and we'll make sure to send that around via chat?
Yeah, Big Interview is a great one to use in order to practice those interview, the avatar interview. They actually have that online. You can create your own kind of interview session even. So you can add multiple questions and have it run like an interview.
Okay, fantastic.
It's also, just to add something into this, it's also important for everyone to understand that that's the virtual avatar or the phone interview or these video interviews are really the first screening. So it's really like getting yourself in the door through that process, but there is always going to be at least one, if not several rounds of face-to-face interviews after that first, what we typically call a screening interview.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So Jamie, you had mentioned the 80-20, right? You had mentioned that the 20% is a unique factor, right? So when you talk about that 20% being what's unique about you, what comes to mind is personal brand, right? We hear a lot about that. So can you explain, what that means as an individual looking for a job? What is a personal brand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I love this. Branding is what people say when you're not in the room. And if you think about branding, or you think about this whole process of looking for a job, you are really marketing yourself. So you need to create a brand, and you need to be really consistent about what it is you're selling, right? So once you've identified your strengths and your skills and you've really owned them, you have to have the confidence to be able to market them to potential employers or in networking situations. So one of the things that we say is really be confident in who you are and what your brand is, and then make sure you are marketing that across all medium consistently. So whatever you're saying in conversations, whatever you're saying on LinkedIn, on your resume, that should all have a consistent theme so that people know what to expect from you in an interview or wherever they're going to meet you.
Okay. I think, and Diane, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really important that you are confident in your skill set, knowing who you are and what you bring to the table and, your authentic skills, and then being able to know how to market those competitively into the marketplace. So the more that we know where it is that we want to be and where we want to go and even who we want to work for, because I often see that the job search strategy is let me apply online to any position that's opened.
Yeah.
Versus this is who I am. This is the culture I want to work for. This is the industry. It's like having a real target market is going to help you brand yourself much better. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot with what we hear from the Vermilion community. What we see people doing is exactly what you mentioned when they're first thinking about going back or making a career change. You go to Indeed and you hit apply.
Right.
So I think taking the time to think about personal brand, what fits, I think that makes a lot of sense. Which brings us actually to kind of the next point is, you talked about kind of this process that you have to go through the avatar perhaps first, a phone call. Majority of people we hear are still getting that phone call as a first step. So we wanted to go into that a little bit in a little bit more detail. So, the first question is always, Diane, so tell me about yourself. Very open-ended, which can be great, or it can go, it can tank very easily. So can you share with us some tips on how to handle this question?
Yeah, and I think it's important, again, depending on the medium in which you are actually having this first interview. But bottom line is you have to have a solid pitch. You also need to be aware that you can take advantage of, like, when we're talking face to face, I can see your expression, I can hear you. Over the phone, that's not necessarily possible. But if you're smiling, your inflection is higher. You can really hear the difference. So I think making sure that you're actually smiling. I like to actually pace when I'm on a phone interview. Actually, if I was not on a video right now, I'd be pacing for you.
Okay.
And then you also have the ability to have visual cues around you. So I'm not saying write it down the whole pitch, but know that you can write bullets so that you can refer to them, which I think is very important.
That's great. That's great. Jamie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit, and I think we're hoping that someone is going to be brave and maybe do their pitch here with us today. But just to talk about the structure of a pitch, you want to kind of start at a high level, talk a little bit about your background, not too extensively. You don't want to go all the way back to, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and then I went to, but you want to touch on the important things. You know, I would talk about graduating from business school. I would talk about working at PwC and then IBM and moving into the recruiting organization. So just so people get an understanding for how your timeline is. And then really highlight your strengths and your skills. Come right out and say, I feel one of my greatest strengths is communication, for example. Talk about where you've used it. We like to have people talk about something that they've done recently, some kind of a success. So most recently, I was recognized for my role in such and such, or most recently, I did a webinar for women re-entering the workforce, something like that. And then typically end it with something like, I'm currently exploring opportunities in such and such. And this gives your interviewer or and this could be done anywhere. This doesn't necessarily have to be during an interview, but it could be done at a networking event, at a cocktail party, at the pickup line at school, anywhere where you think people would be receptive to hearing about what you're interested in doing. So that last line is, I'm currently exploring opportunities in finance or something like that.
And I think, too, and Jamie and I have talked about this, even if you know specific organizations that you're really focusing on. So I'm exploring opportunities in finance with companies such as, whoever it is, naming 2 or 3 companies, because you give someone the kind of that information, they then start thinking about who do I know that knows someone,
Right. I think that, again, makes a lot of sense. Great tips. Thank you. So Jamie mentioned.
Just one other quick one is this, what we're calling a pitch or a commercial or something like that, is something that you should practice as much as you possibly can. So practice in front of a mirror, practice in the shower, practice with your friend, with your husband, with your dog, whatever it may be, just so that it becomes very natural, not something that's memorized. It really should come out a little different every time, but it should sound conversational, especially when it's asked as an initial question in an interview. It sort of starts off the interview. You're comfortable. You've done this before. You got this. It's like an ease into the process.
Absolutely. It's always a conversation, and you want to have that free flow of information. And I think also, your pitch will never be the same, right? I've heard you say that before, is that your pitch will never be the same. It's contextual. In an interview session, in an interview, it's of course going to be a little different than in a networking situation. So just keep that in mind. We were hoping that we could get a volunteer to do a pitch. Would anybody be interested in delivering their elevator pitch here live with us? We did have a volunteer, but we're having a bit of a technical difficulty. So we're hoping there's one brave soul out there that will...
It's good practice.
It is, and it's a safe environment.
Totally safe environment. We'll raise your virtual hand and say, I'm going to do this. So perhaps we'll.
Oh, it looks like we may have someone. Was that?
I don't. Not sure about that, but
Sorry.
One brave soul. That's all it takes. Okay, and if not, we'll have to come back to it. And I think we're getting a question here. Let me just see. Perhaps we can. It looks like we have somebody. Yay! Who is it? Ann Barbara, can you share who the brave soul is?
Mary Jacobson.
Yeah, Mary Jacobson, actually. Thank you so much, Mary. So we're going to just make Mary a panelist, and she is going to take a shot at doing her elevator pitch. So, as we're waiting for this to kind of get figured out, can you share kind of some, you kind of went through what to do. Are there any?
Yeah, I'll give an example.
Yeah.
I always start off talking about, that I actually have extensive background in business, having been in the risk management field for many years. But I feel that my strength really lies in my ability to take my kind of action-oriented business background into the counseling realm. So I really get my clients motivated and focused to move forward. And my skill sets are my ability to get them excited to move towards change. So I get my clients to really look at their past experiences, be able to apply those skills to a passion and move forward in really looking for a career that brings them, meaning. Most recently, I joined Columbia University, where I've been working in a director's position and have revisioned the Career Center. Currently, I'm exploring opportunities in the higher education realm where I can take my skill sets and work with diverse individuals. Something like that.
That sounds great. I would definitely hire you. So great news. We have Mary on the line who is going to do her pitch.
And can you hear me okay?
Yes. Actually,
okay,
could you
good.
Adjust your camera down just so we can see you a little bit better?
Oh dear, camera. Oh dear,
yeah.
Camera. Oh no. Oh
no, you're good.
That's all right, Mary.
I had to be on camera.
That's all right.
It's okay.
How do I adjust? Hold on just a minute. I'm sorry. This is a, here, hold on. Is this?
That's great.
Does that work?
That's
Yep.
perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
got it. Okay, all right. Oh, so now I can't use my cues.
That's all right. Remember, Mary, this is a conversation, right? So Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Hi, I'm Mary Jacobson. It's nice to meet everybody. New York City was my goal. Everybody else usually has a goal of going out and getting a job or a career. Mine was getting to New York City, and that started out when I was in the Macy's Day Parade when I was 13 years old. It changed my life, and 13 years later, I moved to New York City knowing 3 people. So my background, and that's kind of how I have that's kind of been how I've approached my career. When I feel like I've got to, instinctively, I want to go for something, I just go for it. I started out as a trader on Wall Street for 10 years. I then went to work for Reuters, helping them start a television network. And then I got into the conference business, both with institutional investor and then 17 years at the conference board. When I look back upon my career, I think of the 5 C's: communicator, connector, creator, curiosity, and collaboration. And everything that I've done in my career has been that. I am currently looking for a position to lead a nonprofit organization or an association or a conference company. And that's my pitch. It's pretty bad, I know. Sorry.
No, actually, I really liked it. I think there was a lot of good information in there.
What you don't know is you don't know what I do, though.
Well, but I think that you don't want to try to mold yourself into one job title. And so I think that, saying a nonprofit, a conference company, fundraising, I do think if you could try to target some specific organizations, it might bring to mind for people where you're looking to be. I loved the 5 C's.
Okay, good. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, the 5 C's were great. The only thing I would be careful with is I do feel like you telling me 13 years here, 12, I'm now trying to figure out, okay, how old are you?
Oh, okay. So, okay, got it. Okay. So I should say when I was in junior high, I came
right, and that you were passionate about getting to New York City.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Okay. All right.
And that, that's kind of been your career path, is that when you put your mind to something, you know that you're going to get it accomplished.
Yeah, and you know what I didn't leave out, and I think this, it kind of helps the story a little bit, is I came from a farming town in Kansas of 3,000 people. So New York City was a really big deal.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like the polar opposite, but it was, I embraced it and I loved it and, you know, whatever. So I need to work on it. So thank you.
Well,
You
that's
know,
what
I
we
have no
do.
idea how I
Thank
look.
you so
Oh my
much.
gosh.
No, Mary, thank you for putting yourself out there. I think that's what this process is all about as well.
Thank you. Now, how do I
Putting yourself
stop the
out there to
video?
receive.
Well, and can I just add one thing?
Sure, yeah, of
I
course.
think that despite the fact that you didn't realize that the first time I was on something like this and I didn't know it was going to be a camera either. And all of a sudden I saw my face and I was like, hair was in a ponytail, like my dog was barking, like I was just totally, so I think you were very well composed given the circumstance. But I also feel like your enthusiasm came out immediately.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I thought that was really refreshing to get, I mean, it was very obvious that you're enthusiastic about, you know, I thought you were going to say you came to New York and you became a dancer because you were in the parade. And then all of a sudden you've got all this finance and like real deal work experience. So I think it shows how dynamic your personality is.
Right.
Actually, I could say I've performed on Broadway before, literally the street, marching in a parade. So anyway, I try and build, I know the importance of the story and
Yeah.
and it's kind of corny, but it's real.
No, I can hear that. I can hear the passion. I can hear the, you know, and that you've got to be authentic. I think that's really important. And that definitely comes across in your pitch.
Great. Thank you for the feedback, ladies. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for joining us. And we were able to figure out our bit of our technical difficulty. And we actually have Preeta on the line as well. So
is Preeta with us?
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am very good. How are you?
Good.
So I will make my elevator pitch. Unlike Mary, I'm not brave enough to put myself on the video. So a little bit about me. My name is Preeta John. I graduated from Delhi University in English literature. From there, I went to pursue a career as a trainer for GRE, GMAT, and SAT for a training company. So after some time, I moved, after a period of 3 years, I moved to Dubai in 2007, where I worked for Gulf News as a proofreader initially. And I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. So I switched to advertising, and I worked as account manager, selling advertising space to all companies in UAE in the Middle East. From there, since the age, the work that I did initially in training, I really loved that. And I wanted to get back in training. So when the company that was looking at expanding their operations in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they requested me to join their team, I joined them as a business development manager and a trainer. And I worked with them for a period of 4 years as a business development manager in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And I really enjoyed the work that I did. But after a period of 4 years, I still felt that I needed a bit of exploring, and like I needed to really do something in terms of educating myself and learning more and exploring. So I went to pursue my MBA in Arizona from Arizona State University, and I graduated in December 2016 from Thunderbird School of Management as a valedictorian. And from there, I came to New York since I have family here. So, and I applied to a couple of jobs, yes, but since I come from a different country, it was a little tough. The market was a little tough for me. And I ended up joining a publishing company as a management analyst. And I work with them as a management analyst doing research and analysis and business development for their territories in New Mexico, Hawaii, and Arizona. Now, I remember Jaime talking about the strengths. I believe the biggest strength I have is how I work in teams and how I can really collaborate well in teams. And a lot of people have told me that I'm good at managing projects. Currently, since it's just been a couple of months that I've worked with this company, eventually what I plan to transition into is again back into education, but educating through technology. So that is what my career goal is, and that's what I look to transition into.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Preeta.
So do you want to say something first, Jaime, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I like it. I mean, I love the fact you're valedictorian of Thunderbird. I want that like right up front. Okay. Yeah. That's like a huge accomplishment. Amazing. And I think, the dedication and commitment to your education is something that you want to really stress as like lifelong learner. I did feel like you were kind of walking me through your resume too much.
Yeah.
I feel like the pitch should be a little more playful, like that you're not going to answer every question about your kind of experiences. But again, what's that 3,000-foot view of who you are? You're a team player. You're a collaborator. You've been great on working on, project management. And these are the skills that you really want to get across. And I would try to get those up front as much as possible. And then, think about those translatable to the work that you've been doing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just add to that. I mean, and this was the first, your first shot at this. So it's always kind of nerve-wracking to be to be out there, to put yourself out there. But it's a little shortened a little bit, and a little more just flow a little bit. I felt like it started to go on and like, oh, okay. And then I did this, and then I did this. So
yeah, I agree. So I just wanted to thank you so much, Preeta, for doing that. That was fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making me part of this.
Okay.
Preeta, thanks for joining us. Hopefully that was helpful.
I do see in the chat box, I just wanted to just hit this question because Lori was asking, she has a bit of a different situation where she's been launching her own business, although it's a presentation, public speaking, and on-camera work for professionals. I think when you're pitching your company, I want you to have a real wow statement. And, like thinking of something like, I build branding muscle, or I do eye surgery for small businesses, or, like something that's going to be a real wow that people are going to say, so how do you do that? Just, I think it's a little different. And look up pitching for organizations, because you do want to pitch your company, but you also need to have your brand. And I have some great LinkedIn profiles, which I can share that kind of bring across those skills.
So Diane, we'll make sure to get those from you and send it out to all the participants after the call today. And Lori, just wanted to say welcome back. Lori was actually one of the first members of Vermilion way back when. So Lori, thanks for joining us for the great question.
Okay.
Wonderful. So let's keep moving. So we've gone through that first question of, tell me a little bit about yourself. The next, type of questions that we hear a lot about these days from companies as well as members of our community is, that face-to-face, and where you have a competency-based question or a behavioral question. Tell us a little bit, give us a little background on what this is and what this looks like.
I think, when we think about why they do behavioral interview questions, because if you are able to accomplish something and show the competencies that you've used it in your past, then we know that you're able to successfully bring that skill forward. So I think that's the best indicator for future success is what they're considering, not just, and I see so often people give me theory when I ask a question. That doesn't really show that you've actually been able to do it. By being able to tell a real specific example we know that you have had a good indication that you could use that skill and that it could move forward.
Yeah.
So
yeah, make it tangible. I think that's fantastic. Jamie, just checking in. Are you all set? Getting there?
I'm
Okay.
just hoping for the best.
Okay. Fingers crossed, everybody.
Yes, sorry.
So moving on, we hear feedback from hiring managers about, how they're interviewing just volumes of people. How can you stand out? So you want to make it tangible, but how can you stand out as an individual?
So, I mean, this slide says, everyone loves a good story, right? I mean, there are podcasts, there's so much about storytelling now as just a pastime that been using storytelling in interviews for a long period of time, and it's very, very effective use of getting your point across. So here's sort of the framework for telling a story. So earlier we talked about identifying your strengths and really owning them and feeling confident. And whether it's a skill or a strength that you want to highlight, the best way to do that is to tell a story where you've used it in the past. So you want to sort of describe a situation and how it was, and tell what the problem was, what you did about it, and what was the result. How you can then use that skill again, like what Diane was saying. If I tell you something about what I've done in the past and I really give a good example of it, that shows that I own that skill. I've used it in one situation, I can use it again. And I will tell you, as a recruiter at IBM, we used to bring in groups of people. I used to recruit college campuses. So that was our first round interview. And then we would bring them in for many, many interviews after that in one full day. So they would have to meet with maybe 5 or 6 people before the end of the day. Well, from the interviewer's perspective, that's meeting 50 candidates in one day. How do you keep track of all that? I mean, granted, they're taking notes, but at the end of the day, when we have a roundtable discussion and we're talking about, Jim, well, who was Jim? Who liked him? Oh, Jim was the one that told that amazing story. I mean, I still remember stories about candidates from many years ago.
And I just want to say, I really truly believe if you have 10 good success stories, you can ace almost any interview. Because you're highlighting a skill, but when you tell a story, there's so many other skills that come out of that. So you can reframe the story to answer different questions. Don't use it 5 times, but you could use it a second time and reframe it to answer another question.
Yeah, that's a great point. And hopefully we'll get a chance to walk through a few examples. But before we do, can you just give us some examples of what these questions look like?
So I think, we have questions like, have you ever been faced with a problem or a stress that tested your limits? What did you do? And even throwing in, what would you do differently? Mm-hmm. So needing to think about, we've all had problems that, stress us out. We have to think in terms of one that we had success in resolving, right? I think we're always thinking, why are they asking you this question? Before you answer the question, you definitely want to think about that.
You'll be able to tell that it's a sort of behavioral type question because they'll say, tell me a time when, or give an example of a situation where you've had to be relatively quick on your feet. Or, so that would be another example. And so what is it that they're looking for? They want to know, do you have that skill? Are you able to think quickly without a lot of preparation, if that's what the job is going to entail?
Right.
Another one that I always used to love asking was, tell me about a time when you've failed. And you have to say, well, why is the interviewer asking that? Why do they want to know my failures? Why don't they want to know the good things that I know how to do? And I would usually tell my candidates, listen, I really don't care what the failure is. Really what I'm looking for is what you did with it. Mm-hmm. And how did you react? How did you overcome that? What did you learn from that? So it's not necessarily, so like Diane said, you have to take a moment, and it's okay to say to an interviewer, I need a second. Because a lot of people do need a second. You can process for a second before jumping into your, you don't have to jump right into your answer. You can process. So really taking a second to say, all right, what are they asking? Let me be very particular in what I need to say.
And that's why we're going
So-
through this process. I'm sorry, Diane.
That's all right. I'm just going to say, you can also ask them to restate the question if you're not really sure.
Yeah.
So get clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is why we're doing, the webinar today is so you have a chance to think through these questions, potential answers, potential success stories, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes as well, because you don't want to be thinking of the answers on the fly as you're sitting there. You definitely want to prepare, right? So that's
Absolutely.
That's what this is all about. Wonderful. So we're going to do a quick poll and just a time check as well. We're about 15 minutes out, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A and that we have a chance to go through some questions. So how confident do you feel in answering these type of questions, behavioral questions, that is? We just want to see what your experience level is in doing this. We'll just give a second for the answers to come in, and Barbara will show us the results in just a moment. I think this will, here we go. Oh, excellent. So the majority, actually everybody, 100% have done it before, but need to refresh, which was my experience as well when I returned to the workforce. So perfect. So let's get to it. So we call this next segment the interview hot seat, and we are not asking for volunteers for this. We're sparing everyone a bit. We'd love to go through a couple of examples of questions, and would love to hear how you would answer the questions. Okay, so the first question would be, have you ever been faced with problems or stress that tested your limits, and what did you do? I think we had talked about this earlier. How would you answer this question using the concept of a success story?
So I had a situation where I was heading up to Maine to meet my family, and I was driving on 95, and I got off at the rest stop and was going into the bathroom. When I got into the bathroom, there was a girl in there that was crying hysterically, and no one was listening to her. So I quickly engaged and realized that the girl was telling me that she had been kidnapped, and no one was doing anything. So I got the entire bathroom to work together, got the 911 called. We were able to apprehend the kidnapper, and found out that she had actually been taken over to state line. She was only 15 years old. So I know I'm the kind of person who, in a real crisis situation, is able to think clear, to be able to motivate others to take action and get results. So I think the interesting thing about that story is it is a true story.
But I did want to weigh in on this. Well, what first and foremost is I think it's really fascinating that Diane chose to talk about an experience that really was not a paid experience. It's not work related. It's something that we can all relate to, right? We've all gone on a road trip and stopped somewhere and maybe seen some people that we didn't really know what was going on, but so we could relate to it. She really pulled us right in there, right? We're like, I mean, I don't know, but I've heard this story before, but even still, it really brings you in. It's believable. It's not like she made it up. She didn't just say, oh, well, I'm really good at thinking on my feet and handling crises. She really gave real examples of how that's happened and what she's done to fix a problem.
Right. And I think it also can answer other kinds of questions too. I could use that story in, have you ever had a situation where you had to deal with something you weren't really comfortable with, or a situation where you had to think relatively quickly on your feet? It would answer any one of those questions.
So let's go through one more question. Let me see what we have here. How have you handled a situation where you had to deal with something you're not totally comfortable with?
So again, I think I could use that question, that success story again. I think that when I often hear people answering, and I just want to give an example of kind of a flat not telling a story, right? Mm-hmm. So I could turn around and say, oh, I've had to deal with that, and so often, being a mother or a grandmother, and even in my work, I've constantly had to deal with situations that I haven't been comfortable with, right? That's not really answering. Again, giving that success story really shows that you've been able to do it.
Right. Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for being in the hot seat and sparing our audience members today. And, you know, the last question you always get is, which I feel is a very important question, is what questions do you have for me? So do you have some quick tips here on how to kind of close the interview, how to wrap that up? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we always say that you should go in with, and it's right here on the slide, you should really go in with 5 well thought out, well prepared questions for the end of the interview. And there are a lot of reasons for this. One is it shows that you've done your research, that you understand the company and the industry, and it shows that you're dedicated to this. This isn't just some random thing. You've really put in some time and effort to understand what this opportunity is all about.
So, I mean, it does give you the opportunity to really assess the culture, you know, and to be able to make sure that it is a good fit for you. I think that's really important. You're going to want to show that you've done your research, identifying like any challenges or things that you've heard. I think one really great question is always, you know, can you share with me what qualities you think are most important for an individual to be successful in this position?
Right.
Asking that kind of question highlights, they give you the skills they're looking for, so you make sure that you've actually hit those skills, and I think that's really important.
Right. Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. And what about feedback? You know, we hear from members of our community, I heard back, I didn't get the position. Do you think it's good to go back and ask for feedback?
Absolutely. I think it really can. Now, not that you're going to get it all the time.
Right.
But I do think, it shows that you were interested in the position. And they, you know, people will keep people in mind, you know.
Yeah.
So this might not be the position, but you could have been a second candidate. And showing and trying to continue to build that network would be important.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Diane. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the great questions that we've been getting. So I'm just going to check the chat box, and let's see what we have here. So let's start with Liz. So Liz is asking when it's appropriate to discuss salary, and what should she do when they ask about salary expectations?
So when they ask about salary, I personally think that whoever talks salary first loses. You want to be able to get a range. And actually, I just went through this with one of my students the other day. She has a finalist for Nielsen, and she has a looking for H-1B as well, so she's looking for sponsorship and kind of feels that she needs to maybe give herself a lower range. I think it's important to say something like, although salary is important, that's not the most important thing for me right now. What I'm looking for is an organization where I can really develop and provide real, success. Can you share with me what your range is? Trying to get it back to the interviewer. Two, I think it's truly key that you've done your research and almost have that research with you. To be able to say, from my research, the average salary range for these kind of titles would be X to Y. So, can you tell me if that's within your range?
Yeah, Diane, we are having a question come in from Mary about panel interviews. This is something that we hadn't discussed in terms of different interview types. Any suggestions on how to navigate this and how to handle that successfully?
Now, there's actually 2 different types of panel interviews. So is it a panel interview with, several individuals with the organization interviewing only you? Or is it a panel with a panel of applicants too? Because I've seen both of those kinds of panel interviews.
Mm-hmm.
But I say if you're dealing with you and 5 individuals that are each reaching out to you, first of all, know who's in the room.
Right.
And what their interest in you would be. So you might have the head of finance, HR, hiring manager, colleague. They're all going to have different kind of interests. And so being aware of what they're looking for and who they are would be but also keeping in mind when they're asking, if you get a question from an individual, don't just look at that individual when you're answering the question. Make sure you're scanning the entire group so that no one feels excluded. There might be someone who's giving all of the questions, but you want to make sure that you're incorporating everybody into the conversation.
Sure. I think that's great. Thanks, Diane. We have a question from Lori about how to own the gap between jobs. So we talk about this a lot in terms of your career break and how to talk about it, how to own it in an interview situation. Right. And again, it's really dependent on, you've done something during that gap. You know what I mean? I'm assuming we're talking a longer period of a gap, 5 to 10 years. You may have, decided to step back and become more of an at-home mother where you've been very involved with the PTA or you've been involved with different projects. Don't discount those. Those are experience paid or not. And so I would want to get my robust amount of volunteer experience on my resume and be able to brag about that. Right. So actually something that you may not know is that I did actually take a period of time in my transition where I wasn't working, but I became the head of the grants committee for the local PTA, where I developed a process and increased the grants funding by a large amount. I look at that as very much a success and an experience, Yeah, it's all about transferable skills. And when we come back to this topic of success stories, you want to be able to pull relevant recent success stories, which may lead to your volunteer activities or other community activities.
Right. I would say too, even on the resume, you can have things like related experience. You don't have to have professional experience of full chronological order. If you have related experience, you can treat, I would put, grants coordinator for, the Mamaroneck Public Schools. And I treat it like a job.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And we have quite a few questions in our queue, which is great that people are engaged in, and we want to make sure that we answer these questions. So what we will do is take these questions and make sure that we get Diane and Jamie's perspective and share that with our audience following the call, in addition to some of the resources that we've mentioned. Diane, and I know Jamie had to drop off, but thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. It was really a great conversation, and wanted to check in with our audience as well. And we would love to get your feedback on the webinar, on the topic, as we improve our process as well. We would encourage you to, of course, join Vermilion Talent. We would love to be part of this journey and help you to move along in your career reentry journey. If you do have any additional questions, again, please feel free to email Ann Barber. I think each of you have her email address. And preparing for job interviews is part of that process. This was just the beginning. If you would like some additional help, again, Vermilion can help you to take the next step there as well. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Diane.
The conversation. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.